Yapitam swalilaya chayena divya jivanam. Yapitam swalilaya chayena divya jivanam. Tannamami deva deva Ramakrishna Ishwaram. Om Shri Vivekanandari Satchishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatara Varishtaya Chate Namaha. Om Tava Katamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadattatam Bhuvi Grinandiye Bhurida Jana. So this morning, we're still on March 11th, 1883, which was that year Sri Ramakrishna's birthday, the Titi birthday. And so Sri Ramakrishna, the number of devotees had gathered at Dakshineshwar to celebrate the Master's birthday. And among them, there was a Goswami, a Vaishnava Goswami. And so Sri Ramakrishna had just been talking about narrowness in religious views. And he gave the famous example, which many different traditions have used, many Eastern traditions, of course, including the Sufis, the Hindus, the Sufis, the Buddhists. And that is the example of the elephant, that 5 blind men touched an elephant in different parts, and each was arguing over what an elephant is, whether they touched the tail or the body or the leg or the trunk or the ear. And the problem was that none of them knew the whole elephant. They only knew parts of the elephant and were arguing over the parts as the identity of the whole elephant. And using that, of course, as an example to speak of the problem with religious views of people who think that their view of the divine is the whole view, that is everything, that there's nothing beyond what their particular view is. So after giving that example, we continue. Sri Ramakrishna says, let me mention for those of you who follow along in the book, we're in the middle of page 191. So Swamiji, Sri Ramakrishna says to the Goswami, how can you say that the only truth about God is that he has form? It is undoubtedly true that God comes down to earth in a human form, as in the case of Krishna. And it is true as well that God reveals himself to his devotees in various forms. But it is also true that God is formless. He is the indivisible existence, knowledge, bliss absolute. That is, he is the Akhanda Satchidananda. He has been described in the Vedas both as formless and as endowed with form. He is also described there both as attributeless and as endowed with attributes. That is, saguna and nirguna. Saguna with attributes, nirguna without attributes. So here, why is Sri Ramakrishna saying this to the Goswami? It's because the Bengal Vaishnavas, the school that came from the time of Sri Chaitanya, we don't know if Sri Chaitanya himself taught this, but it was the school as it developed from the time of Sri Chaitanya. It says that God, the highest reality of God, is the form of Krishna. That it's the form of Krishna which is the absolute itself. And so they say that those who follow the path of knowledge and meditate on Nirguna Brahman, that they are being fooled by the cloud of glory that emanates from the divine form of Krishna. That the reality is the form of Krishna. That is the divine itself, the form of Sri Krishna. And that out of this form there's a luminous cloud that emanates, a cloud of glory. And so the yogis of the nirguna aspect, the attributeless aspect, the formless aspect of God, they are fooled into thinking that this cloud of glory is the reality. And they meditate on that rather than on the reality itself, the form of Krishna. So that, of course, is a very peculiar doctrine. As Sri Ramakrishna will explain, yes, God does take on forms, but to deny the reality of the formless, and as Sri Ramakrishna says, that which is beyond both form and formlessness, which we'll come to and explain in a moment, that's just narrowness. So first of all, the idea that Krishna is the highest reality and other gods are much lower. That Krishna is the supreme, Kali, Shiva, and other deities are much lower manifestations. That itself is narrow. And then to say that the highest reality is the form of Krishna, the divine form of Krishna. That is a further narrowness. That yes, as Sri Ramakrishna said, he accepted all different aspects of God. The problem is in limiting it to one, as we'll see as we go forward. Do you know what I mean? Satchidananda is like an infinite ocean. Intense cold freezes the water into ice, which floats on the ocean in blocks of various forms. Likewise, through the cooling influence of bhakti, one sees forms of God in the ocean of the Absolute. These forms are meant for the bhaktas, the lovers of God. But when the sun of knowledge rises, the ice melts. It becomes the same water as it was before. Water above and water below, everywhere, nothing but water. Therefore, a prayer in the Bhagavata says, O Lord, thou hast form, and thou art also formless. Thou walkest before us, O Lord, in the shape of a man. Again, thou hast been described in the Vedas as beyond words and thought. So that's a beautiful example that Sri Ramakrishna would use from time to time, that is of the ocean and of ice forming through the cooling influence of the devotee's love. And so the Satchidananda, infinite Akhanda Satchidananda, the indivisible existence, consciousness, bliss, which is beyond form and formlessness, that takes on forms of God just as water takes on forms in ice. And then he says that when the sun of knowledge rises, then the ice melts and goes back into water, because the ice was nothing but water all along. And so the Akhanda Satchidananda, it takes on form because of the love of the devotee. And then when the sun of knowledge rises, the knowledge of the Absolute, then that form melts back into water. So the reality, the form is real, the formless also is real, because they're both made of the same water. Both are the same water. So it's not that the forms are unreal. No, the forms are manifestations of the Absolute itself. They're made of nothing but the Absolute. So he goes on, but you may say that for certain devotees, God assumes eternal forms. There are places in the ocean where the ice doesn't melt at all. It assumes the form of quartz. So, of course, here Sri Ramakrishna is not speaking in terms of science, that the ice actually becomes quartz, but he's using it as an analogy, that that the water becomes quartz-like, hard and solid. And that there is a place in the ocean, the two polar caps where the ice never melts, where the forms of God are eternal. And so Sri Ramakrishna would always say that some devotees belong to the realm of the formless, like Narendra, Swami Vivekananda, and Tarak, later Swami Shivananda, and a few others belong to the realm of the formless. Others belong to the realm of the forms of God, like Swami Brahmananda. And Sri Ramakrishna would say that if those who belong to the realm of form are given the opportunity for nirvikalpa samadhi, to merge themselves forever in identity with Brahman, they don't want it. They want to remain at the level of lila, at the level of play, where they are the devotees, the lovers of God. Yes, they realize that they're made of the same stuff as God is made of, but they want to continue that relationship of love, that assumed duality, in a relationship of love with the forms of God. So, of course, you know, most of you, when Swami Brahmananda was passing away, lying on his deathbed, the point came just before he passed away, where he said, "Put anklets on my feet. I want to dance with Krishna. Can't you see him dancing here on the lotus?" And so he was seeing Sri Krishna, the form of Sri Krishna, dancing in front of him. And he wanted anklets put on his feet so that he could go and join him in the eternal dance with the eternal form of God. So Sri Ramakrishna would always ask his devotees, as he asks him at the Master Mahashaya at the beginning of the Gospel, do you believe in God with form or with God without form? Some devotees would answer one way, others would answer another way. He would say, well, that's good, but always remember that God is both with form and without form, and beyond both form and formlessness. So he always, in his teachings, strove to take away any narrowness that devotees had, the idea that my path alone is true. So the amazing thing is, because let me say first that liberalism has one great weakness, and that is when you think everything is okay, everything is true, then nothing really matters. And so if everything is true, then who cares? Who gets excited? You don't get excited about anything. If you believe that one thing, this is true, then you have intensity, and you go towards that, and you block out everything else. But it gives intense devotion and intense dedication to one thing. Of course, it's also out of that all of the religious persecution in the world has come. The terrible destruction that was caused by missionary religions going around the world and destroying cultures, destroying other religions, killing people. Because they had that intense devotion, yes, but that intense devotion was based on the idea that this is true and everything else is false. This alone is true. And so, yes, that intense dedication that we have the truth and we're going to teach it to everyone, but along with that narrowness, it said everybody else is wrong and they have to give up their belief and accept our belief, because this alone is true. So the weakness of liberalism is that it becomes weak and ineffective because, well, everything is true, everyone is okay as they are, doesn't matter, who cares? And that nishtha, that intense dedication, its great weakness is the opposite. That is, that intense dedication makes them so zealous that they want to destroy everything else except for their one idea. And so though Hinduism is inherently, from Vedic times, inherently liberal and open to a variety of viewpoints, there have been traditions among the Shaivas and among the Vaishnavas in particular, who were very narrow, who said that our conception of God alone is true and that everyone should follow this. The saving grace in India was that was not taken up militarily. It wasn't that they tried to get rid of the other traditions or tried to kill people who followed other religions. They just were satisfied knowing that they're wrong and we have the truth. The missionary religions who took up that idea of our belief is the only true belief, they became tremendously destructive in the world. Terrible, terrible destruction. in the world. India was spared that, but humanity is humanity, and so people being people, there were those in India, in spite of the liberal tradition and the liberal foundation of the tradition, who again had that narrow view that our religion alone is true. So again, the master is talking to a Goswami who is visiting him on his birthday and removing that narrowness from him. Because remember, with Sri Ramakrishna, when he said something, then there was the full power of his personality and his vast realization behind his words. So his words had tremendous power behind them. They weren't just words. When we read them now, we may be, if we're susceptible, we may be uplifted, we may be inspired, we may find them beautiful, we may find them instructive. But we're reading print on paper. When Sri Ramakrishna was talking to people, again, the whole force of his personality was present and was embedded in the words that he spoke. So when he said these words, he was, through his words, he was destroying, through the power of his words, he was destroying the ignorance of those who listened to him. And so here he was destroying the narrowness of the Goswami. Whether the Goswami could accept what he was saying immediately or not, the words of Sri Ramakrishna certainly went into him and continued their work of destroying his narrowness. So Sri Ramakrishna, one of the amazing things in his instruction is, going back to what I was saying before, about the weakness of liberalism and the opposite weakness of zealous dedication to one idea, is that he combined both in his person. He was infinitely liberal, who had respect for every possible religious opinion, and yet he had intense nishta and inspired that nishta in others for their particular chosen ideal. So he would remove that illiberal narrowness, but inspire them with a tremendous nishta at the same time. And that, of course, you see coming down the Hindu tradition through the ages also. But Sri Ramakrishna was a sterling example of that. The idea that Hanuman said that he realized that Krishna and Rama were the same reality, but for him it was the lotus-eyed Rama who was the ideal of his heart. And others who said the same thing about Sri Krishna. They realized that all deities and all incarnations were true, but to me, Sri Krishna is everything. So that Sri Ramakrishna made explicit in all of his teachings, that need for nishta based on a broad liberality. So again, he's speaking to the Goswami in order to not to destroy his nishta, but to give him liberality. So then Kedar says, one of the devotees who is present, a close devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, it is said in the Bhagavata that Vyasa asked God's forgiveness for his 3 transgressions. He said, O Lord, thou art formless, but I have thought of thee in my meditation as endowed with form. Thou art beyond speech, but I have sung thee hymns. Thou art the all-pervading spirit, but I have made pilgrimages to sacred places. Be gracious, O Lord, and forgive these 3 transgressions of mine. So that Swami Vivekananda would sometimes refer to also, and especially when he was in the West, he would say that because the missionaries had spread many false impressions about Hinduism in America. And in Europe, but America was particularly susceptible to these negative teachings, and so he would often say that idolatry is not what you here in America think it is. It's not the horrible thing that you think it is. And then he would say that behind that idolatry is this idea that that which is formless, I conceive in a form for the sake of my meditation. That which is beyond speech, I sing hymns to, etc. And this is a beautiful verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. So that was Keter, and then the master replies, yes, God has form, and he is formless too. Further, he is beyond both form and formlessness. No one can limit him. Now that's an interesting statement, because how can something has form or it's formless? What does he mean by beyond both form and formlessness? That's something that you rarely find discussed. I don't know if I've ever heard it discussed, but God is with form, that we can understand, that the forms of various deities and the forms of the incarnations of God, that we can understand. God is formless, that we can understand. God has no shape. But what does beyond form and formlessness mean? That, I think, Sri Ramakrishna meant that God is formless. That also is a conceptual idea of God. That Swami Vivekananda, when we think of God as formless, we're thinking of a cloud, or like the air or the space which pervades everything. But no, God is not spatial, God is not temporal, and God is not spatial. So our image of formlessness, that God is everywhere, God has no shape, God exists everywhere, that also is a conception based on our experience in this physical world. That we can conceive of space itself. Space pervades everything. Everything exists within space, but space itself has no shape. So that's the closest we can get to understanding the formlessness of God. But that's not God. That's still a conception. Just as the form is a conception of God, that yes, God takes on form, but still it's something that exists within the mind. The form that we perceive through a vritti in the mind. And formlessness also, as far as the idea of space, or a light which pervades everything, an infinite light which pervades everything. That also is a conception. It's based on a vritti in the mind. But God in itself, divinity in itself, the absolute in itself, there's no time, there's no space, there's no causation. So there's no way of conceptualizing it. If we realize that, we've realized something which is completely beyond imagination. It has no connection to our present ideas. And so God is with form, yes, because God takes on form. God is formless, yes, in the way that Christians and Jews and Muslims conceive of God, and some Hindus also. There was Hankar, which is the Assamese form of the name Shankar. So there was a great saint in Assam named Hankar Dev. Again, which meant Shankar Dev, but the Assamese pronunciation, Hankar Dev, who taught the formula. He taught a Vaishnava religion, but he taught that God was formless. And of course, the Sikhs also believe in the formlessness of God. And so that also is a conception, because the reality of God is beyond any conception. And so when Sri Ramakrishna says God is with form and without form and beyond both form and formlessness, that is what he must have meant, because formlessness, as conceived by even advanced spiritual aspirants, are not the nature of the divine itself, which is infinitely beyond both of those. So then Sri Ramakrishna continues, Rakhal's father was sitting in the room. At that time, Rakhal was staying with the master. After his mother's death, his father had married a second time. Now and then he came to Dakshineshwar because of Rakhal's being there. He did not raise much objection to his son's living with the master. Being a wealthy man of the world, he was always involved in litigation. There were lawyers and deputy magistrates among Sri Ramakrishna's visitors. Rakhal's father found it profitable to cultivate their acquaintance, since he expected to be benefited by their counsels in worldly matters. Now and then the master cast a glance at Rakhal's father. It was his cherished desire that Rakhal should live with him permanently at Dakshineshwar. So as most of you know, of course, Rakhal later became Swami Brahmananda. After Swami Vivekananda, he was the greatest of Sri Ramakrishna's disciples. And of course, not counting Holy Mother as an ordinary disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. And in one sense, Rakhal was even closer to Sri Ramakrishna than Swami Vivekananda. Sri Ramakrishna himself said that there was none among his disciples that could compare with Narendra, with Swami Vivekananda. And Rakhal would say that, Swami Brahmananda would say the same thing. But Rakhal was Sri Ramakrishna's Manasaputra, his mental son, his mind-born son. The term Manasaputra, that is in the scriptures, but it's applied to the sons of Brahma, the creator, the original 4 sages who refused to engage in procreation in order to continue the population, and then the 7 sons that began the population of the world. They were all Manasaputras of Brahma, mind-born sons of Brahma, because Brahma, the creator, everything, the whole universe is mind-born. And so Sri Ramakrishna said that Rakhal was his mind-born son. That is, he was given to him by the Divine Mother because he had prayed to the Divine Mother for a companion who would be of the same nature as his. And so when he saw Rakhal, this young teenage boy, when he first came to Sri Ramakrishna, he immediately recognized him as the son which the Divine Mother had shown him in a vision that she was giving to him. So Rakhal was the closest of the disciples to Sri Ramakrishna, and it was said that if you saw Rakhal from behind, not his face, it doesn't look like Sri Ramakrishna's face, but from behind, it said that he looked just like Sri Ramakrishna from the back. So he was staying with Sri Ramakrishna now and then during this time in 1883. And Rakhal's father, as we saw previously, Rakhal's father would come occasionally to Dakshineshwar. So here, M gives the reason why Rakhal's father came to Dakshineshwar. He was a wealthy man who was always engaged in litigation. And I've heard, I don't know if it's literally true or not, that in India there's nowhere where there's more litigation in the world outside of Manhattan, that Manhattan is the only place in the world where there's more litigation than in India. And so he, being a wealthy man, was always engaged in litigation. And so he felt that if he came to Sri Ramakrishna, where advocates and judges and other such people would come, he would be benefited because he could make their acquaintance. So once one of our devotees many years ago, I met her when I was in Trabuco, but later she moved to Chicago and New York, etc. She told me that her husband who was not interested in Vedanta, but a very good man and sympathetic with her interests. But she said that he had started going to church. And I asked her what church he was going to. She said, oh, he's going to the Episcopal Church. And she had a big smile on her face. So I asked her what was so funny. And she said he goes to the Episcopal Church because that's where all of the rich people go, so that he can make acquaintances to help him in his profession. And so Rakhal's father was doing the same thing, coming to Sri Ramakrishna, the embodiment of renunciation, but in order to help his worldly prospects. So master to Rakhal's father and to the devotees, but focusing on Rakhal's father. Ah, what a nice character Rakhal has developed. Look at his face, and every now and then you will notice his lips moving. Inwardly, he repeats the name of God, and so his lips move. And so again, Sri Ramakrishna had this knack for saying the right thing to the parents of those who came to him. And so he is praising Rakhal. And of course, Sri Ramakrishna couldn't do anything false. He couldn't tell a lie. And so he means what he's saying. But he's saying it to Rakhal's father because he is Rakhal's father. Youngsters like him belong to the class of the ever-perfect, the Nitya Siddha, as he would call them. They are born with God consciousness. No sooner do they grow a little older than they realize the danger of coming in contact with the world. There is the parable of the Homa bird, the Homa Paki, in the Vedas. The bird lives high up in the sky and never descends to earth. It lays its egg in the sky, and the egg begins to fall. But the bird lives in such a high region that the egg hatches while falling. The fledgling comes out and continues to fall, but it is so high still that while falling it grows wings and its eyes open. Then the young bird perceives that it is dashing down toward the earth and will be instantly killed. The moment it sees the ground, it turns and shoots up towards its mother in the sky. Then its one goal is to reach its mother. So that's a beautiful illustration that Sri Ramakrishna used to give of the Homa Paki, the Homa bird. And of course, that was what he said that his disciples who were Nitya Siddha were like. That is Narendra, Rakal, Swami Premananda Baburam Maharaj, and Niranjan, Swami Niranjanananda, Purna Chandra Ghosh, who was the one householder among those six. So let's see, Narendra, Rakal, Premananda, Niranjanananda ji. Who am I leaving out? I can't think of who I'm leaving out now. That's strange. I know them well. But one of them is, but there were six of them, and they were Nitya Siddhas. And so all of them were, as Sri Ramakrishna said, those who came from a state of perfection. They weren't born as jivas through the force of their karma, but they came from a state of perfection to accompany the incarnation. That was the only purpose of their birth, was to accompany the incarnation and to help them in their work. And so the other disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, the great disciples like Swami Turiyananda, Swami Shivananda, and the other 10 disciples, they also were great souls in their previous birth, but they were jivas who had worked their way up to a high state and were born as the fruit of their sadhana. As companions of Sri Ramakrishna, the fruit of their realization, born as companions of Sri Ramakrishna. But these six were Nitya Siddha, always perfected, coming from a state of perfection, not going up towards perfection, but coming from a state of perfection in order to be companions to and helpmates of the incarnation. Youngsters like Rakal are like that bird. From their very childhood, they are afraid of the world, and their one thought is how to reach the mother, how to realize God. So you may ask, how is it possible for these boys, born of worldly parents and living among the worldly minded, to develop such knowledge and devotion? It can be explained. If a pea falls into a heap of dung, it germinates into a pea plant nonetheless. The peas that grow on that plant serve many useful purposes. Because it was sown in dung, will it produce another kind of plant? So here you see Sri Ramakrishna's truth-speaking tendency coming out. He starts out by pleasing Rakal's father by saying, and he'll come back to that in a moment, by praising Rakal, and then in a moment he'll praise the father also. But here he says, you may ask how such pure souls as Rakal could be born among worldly parents. And so Rakal's father is sitting right there. He's talking to Rakal's father. And then he says that if a pea, which is of course a seed, if a pea falls into a heap of dung, it produces a pea plant anyway. And so again, he's speaking to Rakhal's father, where Rakhal had been born. So Sri Ramakrishna was never a respecter of persons. In one sense, he respected everything, everyone and everything, because he saw divinity within everything. But when it came to speaking the truth, he was extremely plain-spoken. And so that we see here. And so now we come to the next short paragraph where he goes to the other side. Ah, what a sweet nature Rakhal has nowadays. And why shouldn't it be so? If the yam is a good one, its shoots also become good. All laugh. Like father, like son. So here he comes back and praises the father. So you may wonder, doesn't that undo what I just said, that Sri Ramakrishna was plain-spoken and that he wouldn't lie? Well, no, it's true that Rakhal's parents must have had some unusual virtues for such a soul to be born among them. That, yes, they were worldly in one way, but there must have been unusual virtues also. So Sri Ramakrishna gives both sides to what he's saying. M says aside to Girindra, one of the devotees sitting there listening to Ramakrishna, how well he has explained God with and without form. Do the Vaishnavas believe only in God with form? Girindra, perhaps so. They are one-sided. And so, yes, they do believe in God with form and that is the highest reality. And this means the Bengal Vaishnavas, not all Vaishnavas, but the Bengal Vaishnavas, again, the school which descended from Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Sri Ramakrishna used to say about Sri Chaitanya that he had, like the elephant, two sets of teeth. The tusks were for fighting enemies. And the inner teeth in the elephant's mouth are for enjoying its food. And so he said that in a similar way, Sri Chaitanya, his ecstatic devotion was for the masses, in order to inspire the masses and to bring them into spiritual life. But his inner teeth were for enjoying the state of Advaita, the state of non-dualism. Now, the Bengal Vaishnavas, they won't accept that at all. They say that no, Sri Chaitanya's ecstatic religion, that was the highest religion. There was no Advaita in Sri Chaitanya at all, because that's a false doctrine. But Sri Ramakrishna, of course, his words have unusual, at least for those of us who have studied his life and are devoted to him, his words have great depth and power because he had realized his identity with Sri Chaitanya. So Swami Atmarupananda, whom many of you know, who runs the Washington, D.C. Center, he did his PhD in Sanskrit at the University of Pennsylvania, very fine university in Philadelphia. And he did his doctoral dissertation on Jeev Goswami's work. Tattva Sandarbha, I think the name of it is. I may be mistaken, but I think it's Tattva Sandarbha. And what he was doing was he was trying to find, is there evidence in the textual information about Sri Chaitanya for Sri Ramakrishna's statement that Sri Chaitanya had the inner experience of Advaita, while outwardly he taught the religion of love. And he couldn't find anything conclusive that showed that, yes, Sri Chaitanya had the experience of Advaita and that the ecstatic religion of devotion for Krishna was the outer expression for the masses. There was no statement saying that, but he found evidence that, yes, it could be inferred to be true. So nothing conclusive, but one can make an inference that, yes, it might be true because of this. I don't remember what his exact argument was, but that was the essence of it. And so here Girindra says that, yes, they are one-sided. In answer to M's question, do they really teach that the form of God is the only truth of God? And so, yes, that is what the Bengal Vaishnavas teach. That, as I said before, that the form of Sri Krishna is the absolute. They don't accept the absolute as Brahman, Satchidananda. They accept that the highest reality is the form of Krishna. And so you'll find in the Bhagavad Gita as it is, the commentary in English by Prabhupada, that there, everywhere it brings in the form of God. In fact, here on the wall in our kitchen, we have a wooden plaque which must have been made by the Krishna consciousness people, or at least someone who used their translation of a verse in the Gita where the translation in English says the eternal form of God. Well, it doesn't. The verse doesn't say the eternal form of God. It says the eternal nature of God. And nityabhiyuktanam, those who are devoted to the eternal divinity, but they interpret it as the eternal form of God. That's not in the Sanskrit, and so again, M wasn't aware of that. M, did you understand, again to Girindra, did you understand what he meant by the eternal form of God? That quartz? I couldn't grasp it well. So again, what Sri Ramakrishna said was that in the ocean, the cold turns the formless water into ice, and in some places that ice is eternal; it never melts. It becomes like quartz. That is, again, he's not speaking of a chemical reaction. Scientifically, he's talking in an analogy that the ice becomes hard, permanently hard, as quartz is unchangingly hard. And so M is asking, did you understand what he meant by that? Master to M, well, what are you talking about? M and Girindra smiled and remained silent. So that is typical for M, because again, M was, I don't know about Girindra, but it was very typical of M, because M was very shy. And he would never put himself forward. And so when Sri Ramakrishna asked him what he was talking about, he just kept quiet. When similarly, Narendra was one day speaking outside on the northeast veranda with Hajra about the Ashtavakra Samhita and saying how ridiculous it is that to think that everything is Brahman, that is blasphemy. To think that this cup is Brahman, what a ridiculous doctrine. And so Sri Ramakrishna came out and asked, what are you talking about? Then Narendra was such and Hajra was such that they would just say what they were talking about. But M, out of his shyness, just smiled and remained silent. Later in the afternoon, the devotees were singing in the Panchavati, where the master joined them. They sang together in praise of the Divine Mother. High in the heaven of the Mother's feet, my mind was soaring like a kite, when came a blast of sin's rough wind that drove it swiftly toward the earth. Maya disturbed its even flight by bearing down upon one side, and I could make it rise no more. Entangled in the twisting string of love for children and for wife, alas, my kite was rent in twain. It lost its crest of wisdom soon and downward plunged as I let it go. How could it hope to fly again when all its top was torn away? Though fastened with devotion's cord, it came to grief in playing here. Its 6 opponents worsted it. Now Naresh Chandra rues this game of smiles and tears and think it better never to have played at all. So Naresh Chandra, of course, was the poet, and these 6 opponents were the 6 passions. I don't remember the exact list of the 6 passions, but that we don't need to list them out. We all know basically what they could be. The singing continued. Sri Ramakrishna danced with the devotees. They sang, And then let me back up and say about this song. This is a song of discrimination and one that's meant to engender renunciation. But it was unusual among the songs that were sang around Sri Ramakrishna, which usually sang about the glories of God and about the beauty of God, the glories of God, and the experience of ecstasy, etc. So the singing continued. Sri Ramakrishna danced with the devotees. That song was not much of one to dance to. That wouldn't inspire dance. But this one does inspire dance. They sang, "The black bee of my mind is drawn in sheer delight to the blue lotus flower of Mother Shyama's feet, the blue flower of the feet of Kali, Shiva's consort. Tasteless to the bee are the blossoms of desire. My mother's feet are black, and black too is the bee. Black is made one with black. This much of the mystery my mortal eyes behold, then hastily retreat. But Kamalakanta's hopes are answered in the end. He swims in the sea of bliss, unmoved by joy or pain." So that's an extraordinary song. And of course, Kamalakanta was an extraordinary saint, one of the great saints in the tradition of Kali Bhakti, Kali devotion, a great Bengali saint. I just mentioned tangential matter. There's a very fine classical singer in India. She's Bengali, married to a Gujarati, and lives in Delhi. Subhadra Desai. She was going to come here for a concert, but she couldn't to give a concert here in Houston, but she couldn't get her visa. The invitation is open, so we'll bring her another time. A wonderful singer, but she does many things in her programs and in the seminars on music that she gives. And one of the seminars she gives is a seminar on women saints of India. And she sings the songs from all the different regions of India written by women saints, like Lala, I think her name is, from Kashmir, and then saints from South India and from Gujarat. And the strange thing is that there are no women poet saints of Bengal. That's very strange, because Bengal is such a wonderful culture in Bengal, such a culture of music, such a culture of poetry. Practically every Bengali, that's an exaggeration, but almost it seems like every Bengali considers himself a poet, and they're always writing poetry. But there are no, she said that she had researched, she's Bengali, and she had researched, and that there are no women Bengali poet saints, though you find them in every other part of India. So the kirtan went on. "O mother, what a machine is this that thou hast made?" And that means this human body. "O mother, what a machine is this that thou hast made? What pranks thou playest with this toy? 3.5 cubits high, hiding thyself within, thou holdest the guiding string. But the machine, not knowing it, still believes it moves by itself. Whoever finds the mother remains a machine no more. Yet some machines have even bound the mother herself with the string of love." So that's also a beautiful song, which starts with the problem that all of us have, that is thinking that we are autonomous, that we are an individual self who's in control of my destiny. I am a karta, I'm an agent of action, and I'm a bhokta. I'm the recipient of experience. And I, as an agent, am independent and self-motivated and self-operating. But as the song says, that no, mother holds the string, like the strings of a marionette. That mother holds the string which makes us act. But then it ends on a beautiful note where there are some who have succeeded in taking that string and tying it to mother herself, making that the string of love. Once that string which the mother holds, once that is inflamed with the love of the devotee, then that string itself is what we tie ourselves to the mother's feet with. So it was a happy day for all. The master, accompanied by M, was coming back to his room when he met Trilokya, a Brahmo devotee, on the way. Trilokya bowed down before the master, Trilokyanath Sanyal, who wrote many Brahma Samaj songs. Master, they are singing in the Panchavati. Won't you go there? Trilokya, what shall I do there? Master, why, you will enjoy the music. Trilokya, I have been there already. Master, well, that's good. Perhaps, we don't know, but perhaps Trilokya was not interested in going because he had just seen the master and wanted to stay with him. We don't know. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening. The master was sitting with the devotees on the southeast veranda of his room. That is, the veranda that opens into, or looks into the Kali court, the courtyard in front of the Kali temple. Master, a holy man who has renounced the world will of course chant the name of God. That is only natural. He has no other duties to perform. If he meditates on God, it shouldn't surprise anybody. On the other hand, if he fails to think of God or chant his holy name, then people will think ill of him. So that is like the Nitya Naimittika karma. In the traditional system in India, one was supposed to perform nitya, that is daily, and naimittika, special observances. And it said that one acquires no merit from performing those things which are the duties that everyone is supposed to perform. But one incurs sin if one doesn't perform them. So you get no virtue by, or no merit by performing them, but if you don't perform them, then you incur sin. And so here Sri Ramakrishna is applying the same idea to the spiritual practice of a holy man, a sadhu, who has renounced the world for the sake of God. If they don't call on God, then that is highly blameworthy. If they do call on God, well, what's the big deal? That's what they're supposed to do anyway. What else is a sadhu supposed to do? So then he goes on. Excuse me just a second. But, he continues, but it is a great deal to his credit if a householder utters the name of the Lord. Think of King Janaka. What courage he had indeed. He fenced with 2 swords, the one of knowledge and the other of work, karma. He possessed the perfect knowledge of Brahman and also was devoted to the duties of the world. An unchaste woman attends to the minutest duties of the world, but her mind always dwells on her paramour. The constant company of holy men is necessary. The holy man introduces one to God. Kedar. Yes, sir, the great soul is born in the world for the redemption of humanity. He leads others to God just as a locomotive engine takes along with it a long train of carriages. Or again, he is like a river or lake that quenches the thirst of many people. The devotees were ready to return home. One by one, they saluted the master. At the sight of Bhavanath, Sri Ramakrishna said, "Don't go away today. The very sight of you inspires me." Bhavanath had not yet entered into worldly life. A youth of 20, he had a fair complexion and handsome features. He shed tears of joy on hearing the name of God. The master looked on him as the embodiment of Narayana. And so thus ends the narration of the birthday celebration of Sri Ramakrishna and on March 11th, 1883. So next time we will begin on Thursday, March 29th, 1883. So before closing chant, let me give announcements. And if there are any questions, Seren Ji is here and he will tell me.
Question later.
Okay, I'll give you the announcements and then while Seren Ji is bringing me the question. On Sunday, we will have the usual talk at 11 o'clock, live streamed. Next week, we'll have the classes as usual. Tuesday evening at 7:30, the Gita class, and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock, this class. And so continuing now, and surely continuing through the rest of May, and probably beyond for some time, We won't project how long yet because it's dependent on circumstances. We will not have meetings here at the center. So we're only having live streamed classes and lectures. But if there are people who want to come and make pranam in the shrine, sit in the shrine for a while, you're always welcome. Just let me know ahead of time so that I can be sure to be here to let you in the door, which remains locked nowadays to keep people from just wandering in. Again, normally that wouldn't be the case, but now because of the pandemic, I keep the front door locked so people can't wander in. And so if you want to come, please feel free to come, but let me know ahead of time so that I can be aware and let you in when you come. So, question or questions, we'll see.
It's coming from not.
Okay. From Peg, Dira. Please go back to your mention of Sri Sarada Devi as a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. In the spiritual realm, how does the Holy Mother compare to the other disciples? Good question. How does Holy Mother compare to the other? Yes, let me restate it instead of mumbling just as I was reading it. I mentioned the Holy Mother. I said that Swami Vivekananda was the greatest of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. Of course, not counting Holy Mother as one of the ordinary disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. So how does Holy Mother compare to the other disciples? And the simplest way of saying it is she is incomparable. And so technically, yes, Holy Mother was a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna himself was a disciple of I forget his name. Starts with a K. I don't know if it's Kedarnath or something anyway, but of a man who, when Sri Ramakrishna was to begin the worship of Kali at the Dakshineshwar temple, after he had been in Dakshineshwar for a year or so, and he took up the worship of Kali, he had to be initiated into the mantra of Kali. To do the worship of a deity, you have to be initiated into the mantra. And so a local Brahmin initiated Sri Ramakrishna into the mantra. So he wasn't, this man was not, as far as we know, known as a great saint. He was an ordinary Brahmin, probably a tantrika, who knew the scriptures and knew the worship of the Divine Mother, and so he initiated him. So in one sense, he was Ramakrishna's first guru. And then Sri Ramakrishna was a disciple of the Bhairavi Brahmani. He was a disciple of Totapuri. So Sri Ramakrishna himself was a disciple of various people. And so in that sense, Holy Mother was a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. But Sri Ramakrishna gave to the Holy Mother all of his spiritual power and all of his spiritual realizations in the surrender to her at the Shodashi worship, when he worshipped the Holy Mother as the Divine Mother a year or so after she had come to Dakshineshwar. Or some months at least after she had come to Dakshineshwar. And so the Holy Mother was the equal of Sri Ramakrishna. She would never say that. She would always say that the Master is all. But Sri Ramakrishna always told others that she was his own equal. And so she is a disciple in the technical sense, but in the higher sense, she was identified with Sri Ramakrishna. It was like one reality manifesting in two forms, in two bodies. And so for that reason, she's not often spoken of as a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, though she technically was, just as Sri Ramakrishna was a disciple of others. So that is that. So I'll give a closing chant. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Dhrita Vigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama.